Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Today we'll continue with our third section, which is about teaching approaches. This time we'll talk about the audiolingual method and Suggestopedia. But as always, we have our quiz, which is about grammar translation method and direct method, which we talked about in the previous video. So, what is the oldest method? What's the oldest method that I mentioned in the previous video? And in what form vocabulary is taught in the grammar translation method? So the vocabulary was taught in a particular form. What is it? What aspect did the direct method avoid teaching explicitly? So there was a certain aspect that direct method avoided teaching explicitly. And finally, in what type of schools the direct method was less effective? So let's start. So the audiolingual method. This method shared similar features with the direct method, such as the emphasis on developing oral communication skills. So from its name, audiolingual, so it's audio, so it focused on oral communication, just like direct method. The audiolingual method was strongly influenced by the psychological framework predominant at the time, in particular behaviorist views that considered learning to occur as the result of habituation between a stimulus and a response. So the period of time that the audiolingual method appeared, it was the same period of time that psychological framework of behaviorist view was predominant. So it was affected by the psychological framework or behaviorist view. So it had many characteristics such as the previous views. So the audiolingual method relied heavily on repetition and language drills in the language laboratory. So they relied on repetition. It was considered important that learners avoid making errors. So in this approach, it was important to avoid making errors. Also, less attention was given to vocabulary and more emphasis to repetition of grammatical patterns. So even though it's similar to the direct method, in this method, less attention was given to vocabulary. It was more emphasized on repetition of grammatical patterns. Explicit instruction of grammatical rules was avoided, but in this point, it's very similar to the direct method. Explicit instruction of grammatical rules was avoided. And finally, the L1 habits needed to be broken and replaced by the new patterns of the target language. So, how will they do that? So, they need to practice L2 patterns. So, common exercises included patterns practice drills in which learners were asked to repeatedly pronounce the same phrase followed by a change in one linguistic unit. So that they can break the L1 habits, they need to repeat L2 patterns. Like in this example, the teacher says, I put the book in the table, and the student needs to repeat what the teacher said. I put the book in the table. So what we mean by changing one linguistic unit is like when he said pen, so the student changed the book to pen. So I put the pen on the table. Then ruler, I put the ruler on the table. So they repeat the same pattern, but they change only one linguistic unit. So that's the repetition that they use. Of course, this view had also weaknesses. So the failure of the method to effectively teach real conversational skills became clear. So this method taught grammatical patterns, but actually it wasn't effective in terms of real conversational skills. So they only rehearsed the same patterns, but they didn't practice conversational skills. They didn't know how to communicate. Also, the many weaknesses in the behaviorist approach to learning contributed to increasing skepticism surrounding the audiolingual method. So because behaviorist, as we said before in many videos, was flawed and had many flaws and weaknesses and criticism. So because the base of the audiolingual method, which is behaviorist, was flawed, it was criticized for relying on something that had many flaws. Then we have our second method, which is effective humanistic approaches. Suggestopedia. But before we start with Suggestopedia, I want to draw your attention to the difference between affective, which we have here, and effective with an E at the beginning. So affective with an A has to do with feelings. So it means emotional. So it has with feelings and emotions. But effective with an E, it's something practical that has effects on something else. So please pay attention to the difference between these two because it differs a lot in context. Then let's start with the Suggestopedia, which means like the power of suggestion. So an L2 teaching approach developed by Georgy Lozanov, so that promoted a relaxed, stress-free environment for language learning in small groups. So this approach suggested that language learning should be carried out in a relaxed, stress-free environment and in small groups. So the relaxed ambience would allow learners to be receptive to language exposure through dialogues, role-playing, and other devices presenting features of the target language. So when learners are in a relaxed atmosphere and they're in a relaxed environment, they will be receptive to the target language. So they'll be exposed to dialogues and role plays. So they are something stress-free and relaxed, but they will be able to receive the language correctly in that kind of atmosphere. So the characteristic of this method, Lozanov promoted the idea that language learner needed to be liberated from stress and anxiety provoking factors. Like I said before, the environment needs to be stress-free. There are no anxiety, and so the learner will be focused only on the learning the language. Language learning was to take place in a relaxed, non-threatening environment. They're repeating the same thing, so it need to be relaxed, non-threatening, stress-free, anxiety-free, and something like that. And learners would sit in a physically comfortable environment while they listen to soothing background music. So, in order to be more relaxed in that environment, it would be preferable to listen to soothing and calm music. But it had weaknesses, so exaggerated claims as to the efficacy of the relaxation and exposure to calm music. So they give a huge role to the efficacy or how effective it is to be exposed to calm music, but they say these claims are exaggerated. Also, there is lack of evidence of its success, so it wasn't carried a lot in many classrooms, so there weren't a lot of evidence. And finally, practical limitations, there are a lot of conditions that need to be met in order to be in that stress-free environment. It need to be comfortable, it need to be stress-free, without any anxiety factors and something like that. So it was unpractical. It needs a lot of preparation. So it was criticized for that reason. Actually, that's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you again, inshallah, in our next video.